Hey everybody, welcome to Cut, Transform, Glue. In this week's video, I'm going to continue the repair robot build. More specifically, I'll start the diorama of it. Off camera, I've cut a round base from plywood and I glued a styrene sheet on the top of it. And this styrene sheet will make my life easier once I start adding some pieces on the top of it. But before I begin, I had to grab the robot and I started laying out what I wanted. So I want all of my dioramas to have a human figure, and this is what I did next. I drew a human figure on the 1:20 scale, just so that I could position it on the side of the robot and check and try to see the scene that I want to create. And I've used some double-sided tape on the bottom of each piece to kind of position it on the base and try to find the best pose for the whole thing. And I imagine that in this scene the human figure is kind of running a test on the robot, kind of holding some piece of technology that connects to the robot. Okay, so now that I have decided the scene of the diorama, I started drawing some lines on the base to kind of create a grid. And this grid is important because it will guide me when I start adding some pieces of styrene and laser cut MDF on the top of it. Then I marked where the fit would be. And I grabbed the first piece that I want to glue right here. This came from a dead computer, more specifically on the insides of the DVD reader. And to me, almost all build starts this way. I grab a piece that is kind of the central piece, the theme of the build. And in this diorama, this is this piece right here. Then I glued this gray piece right in the middle of it. And I had to glue it on the base, but before I did that I needed to create a gap, and I did that using my spade bit. I also had to make this hole bigger with my Dremel. Before I glued that on the styrene, I decided to glue in the back of it some screen, some metal mesh to add some detail. In this build, I'm trying this new glue. This is a type of weld bond glue. This is my first time trying to use some other type of glue that isn't CA glue. Then I continued the shape of the central piece with some styrene. And this type of weld bond glue, it works really well with styrene. It kind of fuses both pieces together. At this point I had an idea. I decided to create a gap right here where I will put some tubes and show kind of the insides of this high-tech base. And I've cut this piece with my jigsaw. I made the surface and the lines perfect with my Dremel tool, and then I glued some more styrene to have a perfect flat wall. But I didn't want the base to lose its round shape, and I wanted also to create the ground for these tubes to be, so I glued another piece of styrene on the bottom of the base. I want this gap right here that will show the tubes to have kind of a lid where I will put some metal mesh and add some cool details to it. So by using some laser cut MDF and also some styrene strips, I begin kind of creating a frame to hold this lid. Now, some of you might be asking, why didn't I use a single piece of styrene covering the whole thing? Well, it happens that I wanted to create some gaps in between the plates, some of the plates, and I would decide later where I wanted these plates to have these gaps. So by gluing separated pieces of styrene, I was giving myself the opportunity to find these lines and make the base more interesting and more high-tech looking. So for instance, right here I decided to keep the gap in between those pieces, and I know I could like create those lines scoring the surface of the styrene afterwards, but in my experience this is not as precise as gluing the pieces separated. Now I just have to make this central piece, and to make it I'll use my cutting tool, my round cutting tool, to score the surface of the styrene and find the curve that I need to do. But since this styrene is kinda thick, like 3 millimeters, I couldn't break this round shape perfectly, so I decided to use my Dremel tool to make this round curve. Now the basic shape of the bottom half of this diorama base is done, and I will start working on the top. But before I did that, I decided to cover some of the lines of the styrene pieces, but some of them I made them wider and more visible. Okay, so now let's move on to the top of the base where the feet of the robot will be. I decided to use these 2 round laser cut MDF under each feet of the robot. So I had to prepare this big piece of styrene right here, kind of going around those shapes. And on a mental note right here, I need to remind myself to buy some thinner styrene, like 1 or 2 millimeters, because this one is too thick and kinda hard to cut most of the time. And once again, I'm using my compass cutting tool. And this shot right here is just to show you guys how I work with it. As you can see, I'm doing the movement using the back of the blade, because I feel like if I use the front of it, it kind of wanders a lot. So I go scoring and scoring each time more the surface of the styrene until it's breakable. And if you have a nice surface to bend the styrene, it breaks really perfectly, as you can see. Then I glued it in the base using the weld bond glue again. And at this point I decided to try to glue MDF to styrene using the same glue Any kind of works because the plastic fuses on the wood. Now that I have all of the pieces glued, I can start working on the detailing of these plates. I'll begin by adding these nice textured plates right here, where each fit will be. And I made these textured plates myself using car body filler and some disposable plates. If you wanna know how to make those yourself, go check on the channel. There's a video of that was released a couple of weeks ago. I'll just put the links on the description box. So those were glued in place using CA glue. Then I begin by gluing some thin strips of styrene to kinda add some detail to each of the plate of the base. And for that I'm using these 0.7mm styrene strips, but also some 0.3 ones. Really thin styrene, just to add some bumps to the surface and give it more scale. And I also made some holes on the surface to kinda give me the opportunity to hang some wires and tubes. This one right here, I've put this metal piece that is from the cloth industry. And then I primed this first segment just because I really wanted to see how it was turning out. I have a huge collection of keyboard keys from dead laptops, and I used some of them right here. To kinda hide the fact that this is a keyboard key, because I feel that this could kill the immersion of the diorama. Once it was completely glued and set, I gave it some sanding, because I feel like the concave shape of a keyboard key is really telling. Then I kept gluing some styrene, this time 0.3mm. And then I primed the whole bottom half of the base. Once again I had to make some grid to kinda guide me on the detailing of the top half of the base. But this time I drew some lines using a Sharpie. And I know it kind of defeats the purpose of using those circles of MDF where each feet of the robot would be, but I kind of wanted to create a ring of styrene and glue that to go around the texture made out of car body filler, just because I felt it was like loose in place and not making much sense. So I just went and glued this ring of styrene around the textured circle. Then I wanted each of the feet plates to have 4 details all around it. But this couldn't be glued like this because I just had added this ring of styrene. So I had to kinda match the shape of each of these pieces to the topology of the base. To do that, I kept them secured on an MDF strip using double-sided tape, and then with my Dremel tool and some hand sanding, I made the perfect gap on all of the 8 pieces. Those 8 pieces were glued in place using the weld bond type of glue. And then a coat of primer was applied to the whole thing to kinda see if I needed more detail than that. And since I feel like it did need, I grabbed my collection of round shapes. And I decided to use these types of pieces right here. Those are from cassette tapes. And I decided to create a cool and high-tech air vent in between each of the feet of the robot. I did not wanted it to be proud, so to make a hole I used another spade bit that I had. It was secured in place with CA glue. And then I added another ring of styrene and some other details to it. I did a final detail pass on the top half of the base where I added some of these plastic circles to create some cool bumps on the surface. And I almost forgot to add some details to this square hole in the bottom half. But once I did that, I felt that I had a decent amount of detail and I could move on to this front piece right here, the lead of this tubes area. I wanted the lead of this area to be kinda like a grill. So to give myself a solid base to create this grill, I've cut this styrene piece so that I could create it by gluing some pieces of laser cut MDF on the top of it. Now that I have this perfectly shaped piece of styrene, I'll grab some pieces of MDF and start creating my grill. The idea here is to create the shape of the grill on the top of the styrene, and then once it's done I can cut the excess. In this part of the process, it is almost like I'm playing with Legos. And at this point of the process, I kind of realized that I overdid it. I felt that I added too many details and it wasn't like going well with the rest of the design. But I decided to keep going and kind of decided later. Now that the shape's done, I just had to cut the holes on the styrene. And this is the end result. It was totally clear to me at this point that the design of the grill wasn't too good, but I decided to try to save it. And I did that by cutting away some of the pieces of the grill, making it more simple. I also added some plastic pieces from my collection of gribblies. And this is the final shape of the grill, much simpler and much nicer. So I have this metal mesh right here that I bought a couple of years ago, and I decided to glue it to the bottom of the grill. I drew a rough shape around it on the mesh, and then I probably damaged my scissor trying to cut it. I glued it in place with cedar glue and baking soda from the bottom. And I decided to make these two top holes, one on each side, open so that some of the tubes would come out of it and maybe connect to the robot, I don't know yet. And I felt that this was looking good once it was primed. Now I'll start working on the tubes. I drilled some holes on the front wall and I added some pieces of tube that would guide the electric wires and stuff. So in this part of the project, I'm cutting the tubes and I'm trying to fit it in place and trying to find the perfect size for all the stuff. It is really hard, but these types of details, they makes the models shine, so it is always worth it. And I'm using a variety of types of tubes right here. Some of them are electric, some of them are plastic. And at this point I'm also thinking about the storytelling of the diorama, so I'm imagining that some of these tubes are like electric and could connect to the robot. Some could carry like fuel or oil to the systems of the robot. So this is kind of how my mind always goes when I'm making a scratch build project. Off camera I did some more detailing, and this is the final result of the base. As you can see, this structure right here, it will connect to the robot. I decided on that on the end of the project. There will be also some tubes connecting to a device that the mechanic would be operating. But this is it for this video, guys. In the next one I'll start making the human figure, kind of really working on the anatomy, trying to do a good job on that front. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and check the older videos. There's ways you can further support the channel in the description box, like my Ko-fi account, but as always, thanks for watching.